G'day everybody, Nick here from Super Cheap CPAP. Now it's coming into the cooler months of the year, and at this time we normally get a lot of phone calls and emails with people struggling with water in their CPAP system, humidification issues and the like. So I thought it was probably a good time just to do a little video tutorial on humidification, what it is, what it's used for, some of the issues you might be having with it, and how to potentially alleviate those issues or fix them. So we're going to start at the basics, and that is what actually is humidification and why are we using it. So humidification is essentially water vapor in the air, and the reason we're using water vapor with our CPAP is to help alleviate dryness and congestion. Now our bodies aren't naturally supposed to deal with that much airflow, and this can cause issues with dryness. It's kind of like hanging your washing out on a windy day. You know, it dries out quicker. Same sort of thing with your body. So with all that airflow, the lining of your upper airway and respiratory, your throat, your sinuses, it can get quite dry, and this can cause congestion as well. So having that warm, humidified air tends to alleviate some of those symptoms. And everybody's different. Some people love a lot of humidification, other people hate humidification. It really comes down to personal preference, and that's important because there is no right or wrong level of humidification. It's all about what works best for you and what works best for the area that you're living in and the amount of therapy that you're getting. So the level of CPAP pressure, as you will. So the way it sort of works is that you have that humidification chamber that we fill up with water, and that generally will sit on a heater plate, and that heater plate will heat up depending on the level of humidification to provide the moisture. So as we turn up the level of humidification, we're actually turning up the level of heat that the heater plate produces, and that in turn produces more vapor, so more sort of steamy air. Now, depending on where you live, the therapy level, so the pressure level, what mask you're using, what season it is, will depend on the level of humidification that's right for you as a person. So, like I said before, it really comes down to trial and error. People always ask what's the right level to have it on. There is no right or wrong, trial and error. So what I suggest you do is start at a low level, always start at a low level, and then what you do is you move up as required. So if you're waking up, you're parched in the throat, maybe you're a bit congested, you might need to just tweak that humidification level and sort of just go up in, they sometimes go up in 0.5s or they go up in whole units, but just go up one at a time. And just be aware that you will need to change this as the seasons change as well. So as we come into the cooler months, the air tends to be more dry. So people find that they dry out a little bit more. It's colder. You might want a little bit more, humidification there, just to add a bit more moisture to the air. Sometimes in the summer months, you might not need it at all if it's one of those really humid type days. So another thing with humidification is that when we come into these colder months, humidified air, which is just water vapor in the air, and cold temperatures don't really mix too well. And the reason being is that the water vapor wants to condensate when it touches colder air. So it's kind of like if you breathe out onto a cold glass, you'll notice that all of a sudden you sort of get that mist, that sort of vapor sort of hits the cold glass and you get the water droplets. That's the condensation that I'm talking about. And what can happen through the course of a night is that if the air gets too cold and there's too much water vapor in the air, and it comes into that contact with the colder outside air, you start getting water droplets building up. So the water droplets, the water vapors start to come together, condensate, and you get water droplets building up. And this can cause issues. They're more annoying issues than anything, but they tend to cause weird noises to happen with your CPAP machine if the water droplets pool in a certain area, or it feels like you're getting rain sort of hitting you in the face of a night time, just unpleasant stuff, and it sort of tends to disrupt your sleep and make it a little bit uncomfortable. So how do we sort of get around this sort of what we call rainout in the wintertime? So we understand that the rainout is caused by the cold atmospheric air coming into contact with the warm, humid air in the tubing. So we've got to somehow keep that cold air from touching the tube. So a few things you can do. One is just increase the ambient temperature of your room, especially if you're one of those, colder states in Australia. Definitely Victoria, we get those really cold nights. Tasmania, South Australia, even sort of New South Wales, you still get them. But if you can just increase the ambient temperature of your room, maybe a little room heater, or if you've got a ducted heating system or something like that, it might only need to be a couple of degrees up, and that might alleviate your issues. Obviously, make it probably a little bit nicer to sleep in as well. But obviously, that's going to be a little bit more of a cost if you've got to heat the room all the time. Another thing you can look at is keeping your tubing away from the cold. So tuck it underneath the blanket. Maybe look at getting what we call a tube cozy or a tube wrap, which is basically it's a relatively inexpensive insulation layer that goes around the tubing. They're generally a material type setup, and these wraps will help in keeping the cold off the tubing as well. They have varied degrees of success with the tubing wraps, but certainly anything to help is a good thing, I think. Another thing you can look at is if your machine has a heated tube system, which some of the more high-end ones do. They have different settings on them generally, and you can increase the level of how hot that tube gets. You might want to increase that level because the hotter the tube temperature is, the less likely it is that you're going to get the rainout. If your machine doesn't have a heated tube system and you've tried sort of maybe increasing the room temperature, you're keeping the tube under your blanket and you're still just getting annoying rainout, you might look at getting yourself an external heated tube. And basically this is a tube system, has a copper coil that runs through it like the rest of the heated tube systems, but it has its own power supply. So you just plug it into a wall socket at home, click it on when you go to bed, and that will heat up, and those work brilliantly. They're a little bit expensive, sort of between $120 to $150, but they are good in the sense that they do work, which is fantastic. You also might look at how you've got your machine set up in your room. If you're getting a lot of gurgling noises, it's normally because you've got a loop somewhere in your tubing there. So the way you've got your machine set up and the position is causing a loop in the tubing. And once you get those sort of loops, the water tends to pool up in the loops and cause that gurgling. So majority of the CPAP manufacturers recommend having the machine below the bed head, and this is so that A, it's not right there next to your head, so it's going to be quieter, but B, if there is a bit of rainout, it's going to generally sort of trickle back into the humidification chamber. The water will run downwards instead of down towards you. So I'll go through a couple of questions some of the questions that we get pretty frequently, and one of the things that can happen is people have the humidification set on a set level, and the water chamber will empty to various degrees throughout the night. Now this is natural, and this has to do with a number of factors, and one of them is just the temperature and level of humidification in the ambient atmosphere, and this changes on a day-to-day, season-to-season basis. So some nights you might have a warmer environment plus a lot more moisture just naturally in the air, and so your machine's probably not going to use as much moisture compared to a really cold, dry night where it might use a whole lot more. So that's natural, don't be alarmed. If you're feeling that your machine humidification just isn't working, what you might like to do is actually just turn your machine on, let it run for a little bit, and then just take the water chamber out and just feel underneath the metal plate of the water chamber. That should feel warm to the touch. You can also, just be careful doing this, actually touch the heater plate on the actual, just give it a sort of a tap like that, on the actual unit itself where the water chamber sits, and once again should be feeling warm to the touch. If you're finding that it's just stone cold all the time, you might actually have like an element broken and the plate actually not working. Some of the older machines, the older Fisher & Paykel 600 series, the 50 series Philips, pretty prone to these sort of issues. So it might be, if you feel like it's just not working, the water level never drops down, just you can check that out. So that's just a few tips just coming into those colder times of the year. You can tell by my facial hair that I've been getting a little bit cold myself, just putting on the winter blanket. So I hope you've enjoyed that video. I will try and do a few more. Been pretty busy lately, but I'll keep trying to put a few up for you. So if you like it, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the website supercheapcpap.com.au. I'll put a link in the description here to the Hibernite tubing system, so you can check that out as well if you're someone who sort of wants an added level of humidification. And we're also working on at the moment, sort of talking to a few of the guys about producing basically a heated wrap, so kind of like a heated blanket for your CPAP tubing. So that should be coming out hopefully in sort of the next 3 months or so. So keep an eye out for that one as well. That should be good. All right, I hope everything's going well with your CPAP therapy. Thanks for watching. I know I tend to ramble on a bit, so thanks for your patience. Cheers. Bye.